All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are starting a brand new chapter. This time we're talking about natural selection and evolution. And I've already put up a video the other day, I believe, about uh, theory versus hypothesis versus whatever. And a theory, if you remember, or if you haven't watched it, go back and watch it now, and then come back to this. The theory is something that is very strongly backed by evidence. And that's what this chapter is going to be about, right? It's not about the theory itself, but the evidence that suggests the theory. And that's what I want to be teaching you guys. All right, so before we actually get into the chapter, I like to start off the same way I start off every chapter, vocabulary. So let's jump into that. All right, gotta backtrack a bit. All right, for the unit number, we are not actually in unit 5. I don't even know what this is. Unit 8, I believe, at this point. I'm a little out of order from when I originally made this. Switched it up a bit. All right. Now, I usually spend a whole lot of time on this because natural selection and evolution are very detailed things that we really need to focus on. I'm going to try to not be as long-winded, which is going to be very difficult for this particular chapter, but let's see how I did. Natural selection is a process in which, a process in nature in which organisms possessing certain inherited traits are better able to survive and reproduce compared to other species. All right. That was your keystone definition for this. Let me simplify this for you, okay? If you're better at surviving, you will. And if you're not so good at surviving, you won't survive. And what makes this important is that the ones who survive are the ones who reproduce. So natural selection isn't really about you. It's about your kids, right? If you survive, you get to have kids, and your kids have your genetics. They have your traits. If you don't survive, you don't get to have kids, so the next generation doesn't have your genetics. It will be full of the genetics that were more survivable. Every generation, the gene pool changes. It gets a little bit better for that environment. I'll say that last part again, guys, for that environment. That is what makes natural selection work, right? It's not inherently better, like, oh, my genes are better than yours. No, it's my genes are better in this environment. If we move someplace else, my genes may be terrible. It's about what is good where we are. All right, second word, species. The lowest level of the biological classification, we'll talk about those words in a different chapter, consisting of organisms capable of reproduction that results in fertile offspring. All right, what that last part, that underlined part means is I can get two members of the same species and they can reproduce and make a new member of that species. That's what makes them a species. And you can actually get two members who are not the same species and get them to reproduce, right? Like a lion and a tiger, you can get them together and they actually create an animal called a liger. Ligers are real things, but they only exist in zoos because lions and tigers don't actually get together in the wild. Here's the important part though. They are not the same species because the liger cannot reproduce, right? Right here it says results in fertile offspring. Ligers are not fertile. You cannot get two ligers in a room together and get them to have a baby liger. They cannot have kids. It's just a weird way the genetics are between lion and tiger genes. Same thing with a mule. If you don't know what a mule is, it is a horse and a donkey. They reproduce and their offspring is known as a mule. Mules are not fertile. They cannot reproduce. So it means horses and donkeys are not the same species. Population. A group of individuals of the same species in the same geographic area and reproducing together, reproducing with each other, right? That's what a population is. Same species in the same place and reproducing, right? Philadelphia is a population. We have a population of Philadelphia, of human beings, and we all live together, and we're all living in that area, and the people who live in that area are reproducing and having more people in that area. That's what a population is. There's another population of human beings in Los Angeles. They're not the same population as us because it's kind of hard for someone from Philadelphia to reproduce with someone in LA. I mean, you could, modern technology and airplanes and whatever, but it's not as easy. Variation, a difference from the recognized norm, meaning we're all different, right? Your parents could have 5 kids and all 5 of them could look a little different. That's variation. That is important for this chapter because those differences is what makes natural selection work, right? One of those kids might be slightly better to survive than the other kids in that environment. They're more likely to survive, therefore more likely to reproduce, and therefore the next generation is more likely to have better traits. And the more competition for resources, the more likely someone with not so good traits, someone with a bad variation, is going to not survive. So the more competition, the more likely someone's not going to survive, and those genes disappear. The one with a good variation stays. I just described to you your next word, fitness. Now, variation is the difference. Fitness is when you have a good difference. The ability for an organism to survive and reproduce in its environment. Your differences, your variation is a good one for your environment. In this picture, cheetah, their big adaptation that helps them survive is speed. They are built for speed. They have really long legs for a longer reach so they can get more speed. So you would think that having the longest legs are better. But there's also a weird thing in physics. The longer the leg gets, the easier it is to break. So it's not necessarily about having the longest leg. It's who has the longest legs that won't break. That is a fit trait. Who can move the fastest is a fit trait. Who has sharper claws that dig into the ground. That's a fit trait. Yeah. So whoever's traits are more fit for their environment, for where they live, for their lifestyle, that is what fitness means. Right? It doesn't mean you're stronger. It means you're more likely to survive and reproduce. Right? Sometimes being slow or weak is the way you want to go if that's what works in your environment. All right, now we're going to talk about different kinds of selection. We have directional, stabilization, and disruptive. These kinds of selection can't be witnessed right away. I said can't be witnessed right away. It takes many, many generations to see this happen. Right? So we tend to do this over many years, and we mark it with what we call a bell curve. Right? So we got 3 bell curves here. Named that way because they're shaped like bells. Past, present, and future. All right, so that's a little story time here. Your great-great-great-grandfather was a scientist studying natural selection. He went into a certain environment to study this certain species, and he noticed that there were tall ones, medium-sized ones, and large ones. Right? So here, he marked them down. The bell curve is not measuring height, it's measuring numbers of individuals. So the higher up you go, the more individual animals there are. So here we got small ones, medium ones, and large ones. We have a small amount of small animals, not too many of them. Here, the medium ones, we have a lot of medium animals. And then over here, not too many larger ones, right? For whatever reason, we have a lot of medium animals in this environment. That was your great-great-great-grandfather who took that notes. You found those notes and decided, you know what? I'm going to go check up on what he was studying when he was alive. And you go in that species, and you do your own head count, and you find out there are actually less. small animals than there used to be. And actually less medium ones. So this one, the medium ones were almost to the top. Here, sunk down a bit. So there's less medium ones. And now even more large ones. Look at this, the large ones here didn't quite make it to the top. Here, they're almost at the very top. A lot of large ones. And then you leave those notes behind, and your great-great-great-grandchild finds and decides, you know what? I'm going to finish this off. They go to the same environment, they study the same species, and the little ones are actually gone. The little ones don't exist anymore. This is the medium-sized one, almost gone, and then your large ones are taking up the whole bell curve. This is called directional selection. The bell moved in a certain direction toward, in this case, toward large animals. Right? For whatever reason, in this environment, being larger was a survivable trait. Right? Maybe we're talking about giraffes, and they have the longer necks, they can reach higher, they're more able to get food. Right? So that is directional selection. The bell curve moved toward a certain trait on the side. Stabilization selection, a form of natural selection by which individuals near the center of the curve have higher fitness than individuals near their end. And then the center of the curve remains its current position, meaning we're not moving side to side. Here, the bell curve moved over. Here, the bell curve is not moving, it's just getting thinner, right? Turns out, they're already in the good trait, right? Being medium-sized in this environment is good. You know, maybe they're living in a cave and being too tall means they bump their head on the stalactites and get concussions. You know, so whatever. Being medium-sized is good, so there's very few tall ones, very few small ones, a lot of medium. And then you come in to the present time and there's even less small ones, even less large ones, so even more medium increased. And then your great-great-great-grandchild comes in, the same thing. The smalls are almost disappeared, the large almost disappeared, almost everyone's medium now. So they all move toward what they were. Instead of changing to become different, they changed the differences to become the same. They got, instead of changing the variation, they got less variation. And now this next one, disruptive selection, is weird. Form of natural selection where the individuals at the upper and lower ends, meaning here and here, have higher fitness than the ones in the middle. A single curve splits into two curves. What that means is something happened. This environment changed. It used to be being medium-sized was a good thing, but now being medium-sized sucks. Right? These guys can't survive anymore. The small ones and the large ones, they're doing okay, but the medium-sized ones, they're not reproducing too well. So their genes are disappearing. By the time you come around in the present, the medium ones have started disappearing. Their numbers went down, but the small ones and the large ones increased. And then in the future, your great-great-great-grandkid comes around, the medium almost disappeared altogether. And we got a bunch of small and a bunch of large. If maybe your great-great-great-great-grandkid's great-great-great-great-grandkid comes around, maybe this bell reaches all the way to the bottom, and you end up with two completely different bells. It's possible for those two bells to become their own species. Like they can actually go from one species of different variations to two completely different species altogether. But it takes many, many, many generations of change for that to happen. Speaking of that word, speciation is a process resulting in a new genetically distinct species, right? These guys' genes are going to be different than these guys' genes. So we got two different species that are genetically different. Started off, looking at butterflies or moths. I think these are moths. They changed. They went into two different environments with two different needs. So this one changed to match one environment. This one changed to match a different environment. Same thing this way. Maybe this one stayed where it was and was good, but this group went off and this group went off. Either way, we end up with different species. They are genetically different. They don't just look different because, variation back here, they all look different, but they're the same species. Now, speciation is when the DNA is so different that they can't reproduce with each other anymore and make a viable offspring. Right? This guy made it with this guy. Their offspring would not be able to reproduce. All right. Isolating mechanisms. Something needs to cause this. Right? Something needs to cause this one group to become two different groups. That's what we call isolating mechanisms. Features of behavior, morphology, meaning the way they look, or genetics, which serve to prevent mating or breeding two different species. Something is going to prevent these two groups from breeding with each other. That's what isolating mechanisms are. And we are going to have a whole list of those different things that can happen. Genetic drift is one of them. A change in the allele frequency of a population as a result of chance events. Right? Allele frequency. We just got out of a chapter talking about alleles, right? Your genes, one from mom, one from dad. How often do those alleles appear in your entire population? That's your allele frequency. Genetic drift is a sudden change in that, where natural selection causes a change in your allele frequency because some traits are better than others. If your traits aren't good, you die. You do not get to reproduce. Genetic drift, on the other hand, has nothing to do with how good you are. You were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. You could have the best traits for surviving in your environment. And we are human beings living in a city. What helps us survive? Our brains. We are intelligent beings. We know how to hold a job. We can use technology. If you're great at computers in this day and age, that's a fantastic trait. If a lion escapes the zoo and kills you, that had nothing to do with your traits in your environment. All right? That's what we call genetic drift. This lion just escaped. This was a one-time event, had nothing to do with your normal environment, and killed a whole bunch of people. Now the gene pool is different because those people cannot reproduce. Nothing to do with being fit or not, just wrong place, wrong time. Founder's effect is another thing that can cause these differences to happen. It's a decrease in genetic variation caused by the formation of a new population by a small number of individuals of a larger population. Meaning I got a whole bunch of ladybugs, some red ones, some yellow ones. Let's pretend there's some orange ones there too. And the red ones, a couple of red ones decide, you know what? I like that island over there. We're just going to live there instead. And then we get a whole island of just red ladybugs. Right? The genetic variation is vastly different here than it is here because there are no yellow ones to reproduce and spread the genes. And that's the founder's effect. They found this island and made it their own. And migration is kind of the opposite of that. The permanent movement of genes into or out of a population resulting in a change in allele frequency, meaning deciding to move. This guy migrated over here, spread his genes, and now this group has those genes. Maybe this guy moves over here, migrates this way, and spreads his genes, and now they have more red in this group. Birds do that all the time. There's a certain number of birds that live up north. They fly south for the winter. They reproduce down south. Now down south has more of our northern bird genes than they would have normally. And then they fly north in the summer and live that way again. That's migration, changing some population's allele frequency because you moved in and added your own. That's migration. All right, so those are our words. We only got 13. This is now officially the beginning of a whole new chapter. Next time you come onto Google Classroom, it should be our first set of actual notes. So good luck.